All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast. And today's episode is a must listen. We are talking to a millennial, Ben, who by the age of 24 has got 3 investment properties. And before you jump to conclusions, folks, there is zero silver spoon in this person's mouth. It is a story that you have to hear to believe it. Ben, what else are we covering?
Oh, it's all about hard work, Bryson. And what's making property news? I'm going to talk about land rebates. They're back again in one state around the country. You guess which state? You'll hear it at the end of the show.
Land rebates, Ben, sounds like a canary in the coal mine. Let's rip into the show.
Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to 2 of Australia's leading experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle channel, co-host of Escape from the City on the ABC, and partner of Empower Wealth Advisory. Ben Kingsley, chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the founder of Empower Wealth Advisory, named the 2018 and 2019 Property Advisory Firm of the Year. Stay tuned as they bring you the insider's guide to property, finance and money management.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast. And Ben, welcome back to you too. Good to see you on the winners list again, mate.
Oh, it was tight there, mate, but we got over the line. So we're still a smoky for finals, but, let's be honest, it's probably unlikely. Sydney coming off that loss, we've got to face them after that. So there'll be a little bit more intensity and effort in that game. That will be very much finals-like footy.
Wow.
But it was a cracking game. It was a cracking game on Saturday night. So, yeah, that was good.
I thought it was good for Freo until they decided not to win. So
they were up by 20-odd points.
25 points, mate. 25 in the last quarter.
Well, we were 32 up in the last quarter, and so we only won by 3 points or whatever it was.
Well,
anyway.
Let's move on. Hey, the webinar. We've got an upcoming webinar for property investors on how to use Moorr to run their investment property portfolio, Ben. That's a real gap, isn't it? No matter how many people we've spoken to, if they've got over 100 properties, if they've got their first property, they've got 10. Yeah. Everyone's just doing it on spreadsheets, but we want to show them that there's another way.
Yeah, well, I mean, our vision has always been that, we're subject matter knowledge. We've got obviously hundreds of years of experience in investing in property through our group, and we're sort of bringing all that together into the Moorr platform. So we just basically want to make sure that you can run and manage your investment portfolio in one single location. So that's the journey that we're on. So we're going to talk about how you set up for success as a property investor in using the Moorr platform. And we've got some exciting things to showcase as part of that. So we've got 2 new obviously feature tools that we've built into that platform. One is the property cash flow projection, and the other one, as we're going to air today, is actually not live yet. So a little bit of a sneak peek, but it's a rental analysis. That's all I'll tell you. Ooh. So we'll showcase that a little bit more over the coming weeks, as that is about to go live anytime soon. But it'll definitely be live by the time we run the webinar in a couple of weeks. So that's just details are in the show description. It's Tuesday, the 20th of August. So we'll be running that on Tuesday night. So get the details there, log in, register. And if you obviously can't make it on the night, there will be the recording that we'll be able to send to you because you've obviously registered. But if you don't register, then you're not going to get any of the knowledge building that we're going to share on that night in terms of how to get the best out of Moorr as a property investor.
Ben, but come live. You and I are going to be there. We're going to
we're going to be there. We're going to be showing it off.
Don't wait for the replay. Everyone gets a replay and they never get around to watching it, Ben. So
good point.
Just turn up live, crew. So as Ben said, the 20th of August, 7:30 p.m. Just if you're in Perth, if you're wondering, that'll be 5:30 your time. So it's 7:30 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. And Sticky tells me it's from data to decisions, Ben. It's Moorr's tools for savvy property investors. So check that out. And you can go to thepropertycouch.com.au / you ready? Moorr webinar. Now, just in case you're going to spell Moorr wrong, Ben, it's MOORR webinar. So Moorr webinar. Excuse me. So thepropertycouch.com.au / Moorr webinar. We'd love to see you there. Ben, what about the PIPA sentiment survey?
Yeah, so Bryce, last week I appeared at the New South Wales Government Inquiry and Committee into No Grounds Eviction. So we'll be posting that information on the PIPA website for people to watch. But the data that we're using from, when we sit in front of parliamentarians and when we sit in front of regulators and decision makers, that data is so critical towards our argument. And, at the moment, they're getting information from obviously all of the rental tenancy support unions and so forth, which are heavily government funded. They're getting some feedback from the real estate institutes and potentially property managers, but they need to hear from the actual owners of the property. And this is your chance to actually put your information together. And it's that information that should inform government in terms of what your decisions will be. So please click on the link that's in the show description and obviously fill out that survey, because we do it once a year. It's the 10th anniversary of that survey, and we've got some really important questions that we're asking to try and capture the mood of property investors currently. So please fill out that survey, because we need as many responses. We need thousands of responses, because it's going to be really hard for the politicians to ignore our voice if we get those thousands of responses. So don't leave it up to anybody else to fill it in, because ultimately, if you do, and something happens and it impacts your future return on your property, you've only got yourself to blame.
Yeah, don't do it in hindsight, folks. So absolutely, just click on the description, hit the photo in wherever you're listening, and there'll be some details for you to check that out. Hey, my Mindset Minute today, Ben, is setting us up for a conversation we're about to have. I saw this sign. I thought it was really poignant for what we're about to chat about today. But stay away from negative people. They have a problem for every solution. Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein gets attributed to a lot of stuff. So who knows?
Smart man.
Albert Einstein. But stay away from negative people. They have a problem for every solution. I've purposely chosen that one today, Ben, for a run-up to the conversation that you and I had. But we have a very special guest. We've been looking forward to this, and it's giving hope to a younger generation, and also some inspiration for the older generation who may have young people who they want to hear this message. So let's no further ado, Ben. Let's cut to the conversation you and I recently had with Harley Giddings. All right, Ben, we've got a very special guest today on the Property Couch podcast. We are chatting with Harley Giddings. Harley is a 24-year-old passionate property investor who hopes to inspire the next generation of property investors through documenting his journey to financial freedom. Welcome to the Property Couch, Harley.
Thanks for having me, lads. Long-time listener, first-time podcaster.
Mate, we're excited to have you on. But I've got the first question for you, mate. While most millennials express concerns that property ownership is out of reach, you've not only proven that it's possible to step onto the property ladder, but you've managed to do it 3 times at just 24. So what do you say to your generation who are focused on the glass half empty? And what was the pivotal moment that convinced you that defying the odds was not only possible, but necessary for your future?
Great question to start. Really loaded. Love it. First of all, I just want to acknowledge that people my age, if you were to read the papers, you were to listen to the news, there's a lot of doom and gloom. So if you did just listen to the news that's been portrayed, you would think it is next to impossible to get into property. I was a bit like that 3 or 4 years ago, and it's very easy, especially if your parents listen to the news and stuff like that. It's so easy to buy into that. And as you guys know, it's the negative news that sells papers and sells clicks. It's not the positive. When you ask that question, 2 kind of things come to mind. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's not easy to get into property. For me, I work 2 jobs 7 days a week. I work 70 hours a week. I follow a budget. It's not glamorous stuff, but it's what you need to kind of do to put yourself in a position to be able to buy property these days. The second point is also you kind of just need to have an understanding of what is actually achievable. So for me, where I live, so I live just outside Melbourne. People from Sydney would be able to relate to this, but it's probably not achievable for your first property to buy at $1 million, at 800,000. You're just going to be priced out of the market. So for me, I looked interstate at investments interstate. So there are always different options and different avenues to get into property. Maybe it's a townhouse or a unit instead of a detached house. There are just different options. So don't think that just because you can't afford in your own backyard that you can't get into property.
Well, you've given us the headlines there, and we're going to unpack those in much more detail. But before we do, Harley, we want to know what were the conversations like for you as you were growing up? Because you do live just outside. You live in regional Victoria, in a wonderful part of the world. But tell us what it was like having conversation. Did you have conversations around the dinner table when you were younger and growing up?
Yeah, so that's right. I live about an hour north of Melbourne, so God's Country up near Woodend. So it's a very footy and cricket kind of oriented town, small country town. We live and breathe sports. So grew up there. Mum and dad are very kind of blue collar workers. Mum's a hairdresser, dad's a firefighter. So we're the typical kind of Australian family. They met at the footy club. I've played footy. Dad's like we've just lived through the footy club kind of thing. So very stock standard kind of family in terms of what the picturesque Australian family looks like. Growing up, I did have a think about it. There's not like a heap of conversations that we would have over the dinner table. Mum and dad were pretty good at never really saying where we're at financially. We definitely never missed out. We're very spoiled children, always got a trip and that, but it's only since I've kind of matured and started realizing maybe they were hiding more behind closed doors at how expensive it is raising kids and going on these trips that you kind of take for granted as a kid. But yeah, thinking back to the real early days, I do remember the conversations around, I think they're called Dolomites or something that CBA used to do. And I used to feel like a little businessman getting my $10 a week in allowance and putting it into the Dolomites and seeing it on the paper. But that's about as early as we go. So no real like kind of like conversations that stand out, but yeah.
So you started with a Dolomite account, and when did you pick up your first sort of job, part-time job, Harley?
So used to do like the paper runs and these kind of ones, the cash in hands. These are the prior, I think it's 14 and 7 months that you're legally allowed to be on the books.
Yeah.
So at 14 and 7 months, and one day I reckon I was hired at my local cafe. So I used to work there after school and on weekends and stuff like that. And then, yeah, throughout my early kind of childhood, 14 through to 18, I would have been juggling 2 or 3 jobs at a time always.
So there's some interest in money there, but it doesn't sound like it's necessarily coming from your parents. Is it a combination of money in business or money in entrepreneurship, or is it just an unknown sort of quantifiable thing at that time? Like, did you sort of know what you know now, and where do you think the underlying interest came from?
Yeah, I've definitely, I can't really like pinpoint a time when I was younger. I've always just been, me and my mates laugh about it. So we used to go like one thing a year, we'd go to the Melbourne show and mum and dad would give us $50 to go spend on rides and show bags. And my mates laugh at it because I'd be the kid that would go with 50 and come back with $40 for savings. So I've always been kind of a saver and would rather put that money to better use. And whether I'm saving up for a new share in footy or a bike or whatever it was, it was almost like early delayed gratification. I knew that if I wanted something better or bigger, that I can start working for it. And now delay a bit of gratification and get that eventually.
Can we talk about that delayed gratification? Because you and I have had a couple of conversations, and that was something that I found really intriguing about you. We've had a couple of guests on our summer series, younger people, who have this proclivity to delay the gratification from a very young age, and I think that it's particularly difficult to do. And so I'd like to get under the bonnet a little bit more around, did you have the urges that you had to squash? Did you not have the urges? Like when your mates are spending $50 at the Royal Show and you're coming back with 40, what was running through your mind? Because we're trying to deconstruct delayed gratification and deconstruct the urges that come and go. And but you and as we progress in your story, people will see what that built up for you. But before we get there, talk to us about that for people who might be struggling with delayed gratification.
Yeah, sure. So when, like, with that example I gave before the show, when I was younger and stuff like that, there was obviously the footy cards I want to buy. There was always the lollies you want to get, kind of the quick fix. I guess it was kind of my parents to a degree. They always, I guess, instilled early on that if you do want something kind of more valuable, you're going to have to work for it and you're going to have to save. So like I had really good savings habits from a young age. And this has kind of progressed as I began to invest. A real turning point, if you're looking for one, it's kind of the typical, if you're Australian, you're interested in investing or property or getting ahead, The Barefoot Investor is kind of the first book that ends up on your lap. And I still remember reading it. I think Mum put it in my hands at about 15 years old. What a great buy that was for $25. So thank you, Mum, for that. But I still remember there was a little section in there and it was Scott Pape talks about it was his letter to his second born, and it talks about the compound interest. And if you start young, you put $5,000 a year into a standard index fund. At 60 years old, you're going to have this amount of money. And I remember just reading that and going, God, so if I put $5,000 a year, I'm going to be a millionaire. And this was just like mind blown. So I used to run the little compound interest calculators off my wage that I'd earn $10,000 a year and work out, if I put $8,000 a year, geez, I'm going to have $4 million at this time. So I used to kind of run those numbers. And it eventually got in when I was 16. Shouldn't be telling everyone this, but signed mum up to the ComSec account and started investing my money in index funds. So obviously you have to be 18 to buy. So signed her up and started putting my little weekly wage each week into index funds. And it's just kind of progressed from there.
Now, we've talked about, that power of compound. I remember my moment was a 16-year-old reading Noel Whittaker's book, Making Money Made Simple. And that is that moment. Did you take a commerce pathway through schooling or science pathway? Because that was the thing for me. I sort of just knew pretty early on that math and business and numbers and money was going to be a part of my programming. Did you sort of take the same pathway?
Yeah, definitely did. So math and business were my two best subjects at school, and it's definitely how I love seeing the graphs, the numbers on the plate, punching them in, and it's just kind of how my mind works. You put this much in, and this is the return you'll get, and it's progressed to what I've started doing for a living now.
Brilliant. And I think that certainly shows up in the research as well. When you look at the research around aspiring Australians, they do have a default interest in just understanding the numbers a little bit more than others. It's not to say that others can't learn that craft, but there's something just about them in terms of this self-motivation that they do get in terms of wanting to understand it and then play the game, because it's a game. Like, let's be honest, the game is to try and make your money work harder for you. And the only way you can do that is to trap the surplus and put it to work. And you found a great way to do that. My last question in this section is really around, did your parents have a level of delayed gratification or interest around wealth creation and that, or is this just something that sort of makes you left of centre? And I always ask the similar question: any brothers and sisters, and are they similar to you in terms of being sensible about the spending decisions that they make?
Yeah, so it's kind of a different view, I guess, but they were delaying gratification for them. It's only the last few years since I've started kind of being more involved in my parents' finances and what they're doing, which is awesome. Such a great responsibility to be involved in these conversations now. But at the time, a lot of I now know that a lot of my parents' friends that were focused on paying off the mortgage, buying investment properties and stuff like that. And our parents really sacrificed. So they put more of a, I guess, priority and valued time with us and holidays and making memories rather than getting ahead themselves. So it's kind of a good mix, because I'm a very ambitious person, but they kind of give me the balance where it's like you've also got to be able to smell the roses along the way. Yeah. I do have an older sister, so she's 26 or 27. She'll kill me if she's 26 and I've called her 27. But she doesn't have the kind of savings habits that I do. This is what I love it. People hate budgeting. I love budgeting. I know it's going to get me to my next goal, but I've still helped her set up a budget and that, so she's still doing well. But yeah, it's definitely her mind's probably wired a little bit different to what mine is. I'm very interested in the maths and the business side of things.
Harley, you had an epiphany moment there when Scott Pape said, this is what you need to do, 5,000 index funds. I had an epiphany moment on the midday show with Ray Martin, with Jan Summers coming on. Ben just described his. Was there, growing up, a gap between what you were experiencing and what you saw people around you experiencing that created a desire or a drive for you? And by that, I mean, I grew up in a middle-class family, probably on the lower end. So we didn't quite get the shoes that everyone else had at school. We were a bit further away from school, kind of, a bit on the wrong side of the track. So it kind of created that sort of tension between where I was and where I wanted to be. Did you? Because what you're describing is great parents, seeded into you guys, lots of love, lots of experiences. What did you experience a gap that you were seeing that other people were having that helped fuel that?
Yeah, so again, I'm a credit to my family. We've got a great family, and that's the reason I am where I am today. But my mum was one of 5 kids. My nan was one of 8 kids. So it's kind of the typical country town, small, big families. Both parents would work, and just seeing kind of like that next level, what my grandparents and that used to do, kind of like working into their late 60s and that, I knew pretty early on that I never wanted that for myself. And it's why I like nothing against that or anything. I just valued kind of getting ahead, setting myself up financially, and like it's very easy to see the stress and stuff that comes with having to provide for these big families and worry about money. And that's something I never wanted to do. So I've always wanted to kind of set myself up, set my future family up, and also help the people that got me there along the way, which is my family.
So that you're an absolute credit, and obviously your family should be very proud of you of what you've done so far at such an early age. Let's move along to sort of now let's start to think about the investing. So you started, putting money away and putting that money into the equity markets and looking at ETFs as part of that particular story. So I want to get a sense of what you were thinking about there and what you did from an ETF point of view. Did you just track the major index, or did you do any of those more exotic ETFs in terms of tracking, say, robotic trends or any types of trends in different markets?
Yeah, so it was very stock standard. So I had a global index, I had the US index, and then I had a small percentage of an Australian index just because I'm Australian and just wanted to diversify the portfolio a little bit more. But yeah, it was very stock standard. I read a lot about dollar cost averaging and the importance of, rather than trying to time the market, just consistently getting in and over time. But yeah, those were the 3 kind of stock standard ones I was investing in. Gave me enough diversification. All the big companies were pretty well covered.
For the young people listening, Harley, can you explain to them what dollar cost averaging is?
Yeah, so it won't be the perfect definition. Ben Kingsley will be able to give you that one. But in terms of dollar cost averaging, it's basically where rather than buying $5,000 of shares, you might be putting $100 a week, which is $5,000 a year. So it's kind of the same amount, but you're buying at a different point. So if a market's growing, you're buying on the way up. And if the market's declining, you're also buying on the way down. So it kind of mitigates your risk. So you're not at fault of when exactly you buy.
And the thesis behind it is just simple. It's like you can't win by timing the market. So if you just consistently build habits and routines and muscle memories, that's a good way of doing that. I want to now talk about when did property come on the radar for you, where anyone who's going through this journey, you've got obviously choices of shares, ETFs, so you can go direct shares, ETFs, you can go term deposits, you can go bonds. They're the main things that sort of people look at. And then you've obviously got direct residential property. How did sort of direct residential property show up on your radar?
It definitely just came from, so I'm massive on self-education. I've reached out to both of you guys for book recommendations. It's my favorite thing. I think I'm addicted to buying books. I try and get through them as quick as I can, but I just love buying books and kind of educating myself. So as I progressed through, read kind of all those entry-level books. That got me started in index funds and these things, because it's not capital intensive. You don't need $100,000 deposit. You don't need much money. Anyone can kind of start. So that's where I kind of started. And as I progressed through my journey, read more books, started reading about property, found your podcast. I still recommend the first 20 episodes of this podcast because that was such a great way for me to get the base level of understanding of property. But the key that really kind of pivoted my mindset from shares to property is leverage. So we all know that if $100,000 of shares, you get a 10% return, you might return 10 grand on that, but that $100,000 may get you into a 500 grand property. At roughly 6-7%, you're looking at a $35,000 to a $10,000 return, and that's basically leverage. So that's where I ended up.
Yeah. Cash on cash returns. Bryce was talking about epiphany moments. That was my second one. After I worked out what compound interest did, and I said, okay, this is capitalism, so it's about capital and assets, and then you start working out that, okay, well, how do I get more capital? I borrow money sensibly, and I get a cash on cash return. It's a game changer. Yep.
It's usually the central umpire to any sort of discussion. If someone wants to embrace a property versus shares, I'm like, I don't care. Like, probably shares are probably better. If you start your own business, you'll probably create more wealth. But here's the deal: property gives you leverage, and as a passive investor, that's game over, and that's really what it comes down to. So, Harley, let's. You are a big proponent of self-education, right? So, if someone is young, let's say younger than you, should they, and they've got $1,000, should they invest that in the market, or should they invest that in themselves to upgrade their skills so that they can earn more income? What's your answer?
So definitely not financial advice because I'm not qualified, but I would, if I had the $1,000, there's so many free resources out there. As I mentioned, this podcast, there's other podcasts, YouTube videos, and even books. You could get 3 or 4 books for 15, 20, 25 bucks each, and there's $100 if you spent, but it's going to give you such a kickstart to your investment journey. And you don't kind of want to dive in blind. Obviously, $1,000 not life changing, but you still want to make the right decision when you're entering the market. So I'd say a mix of both. You can definitely educate yourself with a lot of free education and cheap education, and then also look to get in as soon as possible because it's compound interest. Once it does its thing, time in the market, you'll be laughing years from now.
You have a phobia. This is on your social handle. A phobia of working 9 to 5 till you die. You've given us a little bit of an entree on to where that comes from. But so Ben just talked before. Okay, we're pivoting from equities to shares. You've talked about podcasts and listening. What was the moment that you officially pivoted and then launched to doing what it takes to buy your first investment property?
Yeah, so it was an accumulation of things. So I got to the point, I was 22, so having worked since I was 14 and had been investing in shares, I'd amassed around $100,000 at the time. I was still at uni, so I was working, it was during COVID, so I was able to do full-time hours at the BP station that I'm still also working at. So as a casual, I was doing 30, 40 hours a week and also doing my uni studies. At the time, looking back, I probably would have gone it on my own. I just didn't have the understanding at the time. I didn't know that you could actually get a loan without being a full-time employee. I'd always thought that you just need a full-time job to kind of service a loan. But looking back, I was earning enough that I probably would have been able to. I definitely had the savings. But yeah, so I got to the point at 22, I'd done plenty of research. I still was very green and kind of somewhat naive at property. I knew enough that I knew I wanted to get involved, but I also knew enough that I didn't want to rush in and make the first investment a wrong one, which is arguably your most important investment is your first property if you go down that path. So me and Dad decided, it was his first investment property as well. We decided to go halves on a property. So we went to the broker, got all that kind of stuff sorted. We got a buyer's agent involved. As I said, I didn't have the education, the confidence or anything to pull the trigger and didn't want to make a mistake. So we got a buyer's agent involved and we purchased our first property in September 2022 for around $450,000. That's where I got started.
And Harley, one of the things that I remember on my early journey when I bought my first property around the same age, because I also had a very similar mindset to you and I was thirsty for knowledge and learning, and I built up a large sort of deposit as well, working part-time jobs whilst I was also studying. When that first leap of faith, when there's a large, sizable amount of money, to decide to do that with your dad is actually not a bad thing because it's sort of, do you know what I mean? It's almost like I've never learned how to swim, so diving in the deep end is just potentially at risk of, and it does feel like that, right? Because you work so hard for that money, so you get a greater sense of the value of money, and so I think that that's actually a sensible move. And if other, people are at your age who are thinking about that, have that conversation with your parents. I mean, just because, if people judge you as not necessarily being self-made because you had some help in the earlier stages, I say to those people, so what? Like, it really doesn't matter. I mean, the fact of the matter is, in other households and certain parts of the world, family wealth and looking at how things work and bringing all that stuff together is actually more meaningful in terms of the generational experience and the generational wealth that you do. So I just want to make sure that there's two things. There's a psychological moment that happens there, which is I'm going to sort of take a leap of faith, but I want to have someone holding my hand just for that first one. And then, as you then know, it's like, okay, the handbrake's off a little bit now. That one seems to have done all right. And then I feel like, no, now I can, try this on my own. take us through that in your mindset. Like once that first one was bought, was there a little bit of apprehension and a little bit of that sort of buyer's remorse or seeing that money go? Like, because that's the unknown, right? You haven't tread that path yet. Tell us a little bit about how you were thinking at the time.
Yeah, there's definitely always going to be an aspect of buyer's remorse. It's the biggest investment I've made at the time, and we bought in Perth, which I'd done the research and I liked the data myself. I wasn't confident fully in what my numbers were saying to me, and that's why we got a professional, we got a buyer's agent involved. It was a big investment. Going in with my dad, it was just another kind of set of eyes that we could bounce ideas and bounce, well, do we think we go with this one? What do we think about this? It's just another set of eyes. Obviously, Dad he's not the biggest property investor. Like, as I said, that was kind of the first one we got into together, but it was just good to have kind of a sounding board. But it was, pretty early on, we saw the growth, and it was kind of just reaffirming that we had made the right decision. And it's quite addictive once you get the first one and you do well with it.
When it does well, it is very addictive.
Hey, Harley, when we were chatting last week, you were talking about, hey, look, in hindsight, it would have been nice to actually have done that first one on my own so that as you project a message to your generation, you could actually say to those, hey, look, you don't need the bank of mum and dad. You can actually do it. But I think as people, hopefully people who listen to this don't say, well, that's why he can do it, I can't do it. Because you didn't really have the bank of mum and dad. You had the confidence of mum and dad. And it's a slight difference because you didn't. Bank of mum and dad usually means let's get a ton of equity from mum and dad so that we can actually get in. But you had the equity. And in hindsight, you had the income. So really what you were doing is trading some confidence from mum and dad. And I thought it was really important to pause and labour this point because you are a flag bearer for your generation. And you are also a flag bearer for anyone who just had a little excuse pop up for them as that's why he could do it. No, he actually could have done it independently on his own. And in hindsight, he wishes he had, because your words to me the other day, Harley's, I think my story would be a little bit better if I had done that all on my own. But technically you did.
Yeah, I get it all the time. So I do post videos and try and be as transparent as possible to show that there's nothing special about me. I just work a lot. I follow my budget like it's going out of fashion. I'm a madman when it comes to that. I do get the occasional comment, the bank of mum and dad, and it must be nice, trust fund baby, these kind of things. And at the start, they used to really kind of hit deep, but now they're just kind of water off a duck's back. But obviously, I'm in a very fortunate position. Not everyone has the luxury to live at home, and I understand that. But at the same time, I'm not just resting on that and working the one job and going out every weekend. I work 2 jobs, 7 days a week. I budget, I educate myself, and I take action. So not everyone in my position is in the position I am. So I'm obviously doing hopefully something else, and that's why I post.
You definitely are. Did you hear that, folks? 2 jobs, 7 days a week. Okay, so there's some sacrifice. Hey, Harley, I don't know if you picked it up.
Sorry, I want to double click on that, Bryce, because I think it's a really important point. Life is about choices and trade-offs, right? Decisions that you make and the trade-offs that you do. So, yes, Harley's not doing a gap year in Europe and effectively wiping out the $30,000 or $40,000 in savings that he's made. He's doing his hard now by doing those 2 or 3 jobs and being able to build up that wealth base, because he understands the power of compound and the power of time to be able to do that. So any of those naysayers who are out there, they're sort of saying it's the responsibility of someone else to fix my problems, or it's the responsibility for someone else for me to live my best life. That's the message for this pod. If you're listening to this and you're getting agitated by it, we're not the pod for you, right? So go and listen to another pod. But in terms of those people who do want to make change, who do want to take the responsibility into their own hands, that is exactly what Harley's doing. And his trade-off. These are judgment calls and trade-offs that he's making. And you mentioned it before. Your mates were giving you a hard time when you went to the Royal Melbourne Show because, they might call you a tight ass or whatever it might be. Don't worry. I've had that conversation with my mates as well. And they look at me now and they go, where are you going this year, Ben? Europe or America, or how many trips are you going to play in? Yeah, there's a few in there. So I think it really is important to understand that these are choices, and you're making choices about your future rather than the the sort of instant gratification that you might get out of a cheap experience as opposed to something more meaningful. So I want to really make sure that that's well known here, and labour that point, because I just, this whole concept to me that people can't create financial well-being, and even in more difficult circumstances, it's still a choice. There's, as Steph Curry says, greatness is a choice. It's just about how hard you want to work for it. It doesn't just come naturally. Everyone has to work, and they have to do their tough and have to do their hard yards. So I think it's a really important message there.
Hey, Harley, how do you feel about the fact that Ben's just giving you a little hint that you and he are clones? So you get to look over the hill and see what you're going to be like as a 50-year-old?
I love it. That's exactly what I want to be.
There you go, Ben. He wants to be like you, which is great. Hey, okay, so we're going to talk about the social media and some of that stuff shortly, but let's go. Okay, so you've got the first property in the portfolio. Tell us what's happening next. Mindset, planning for next move. What did you do?
Yeah, so it's kind of like a game of chess if you're hoping to build a property portfolio. If you're just looking at the one that's coming up, you might be running into issues for the next one. And as you know, property is kind of a game of finance. You need to be worrying about the next one and what you need to be achieving with this one to enable you to kind of get into the next one. So that was very much a focus for myself. As I said, I had about $100,000. So going halves in that first property, I still had about 60, 70,000 left over. Still had the borrowing power. At this time, I'd picked up full-time work. So purchased the first one September 22, and then August 2023, roughly 10 months later, I purchased again on my own, this time on my own, sorry. In Perth again, another $420,000 property. This time I'd done the research entirely on my own. So I really knuckled down in those 10 months. I was listening to a podcast a day. I was reading books. I was doing different courses. And it was really a time where, as much as the buyer's agent was great and I loved that, I knew that I wanted to buy multiple more properties, and on my income, the $15,000 every time was going to hurt me and my ability to keep going forward. So I wanted to be able to learn it myself, not only so it's cheaper, but also I was genuinely interested. I wanted to learn what I'm looking for, what makes a property grow, where should I be targeting. So did all that kind of research on my own, and that was probably the biggest, as we talk about going in with that. It was almost a handheld, I think you said, Bryce. But this one, it was jumping off the deep end fully on my own, no buyer's agent. I'd done the research, and I really just had to back myself and the education I'd put into my own studies, I guess.
Now that research, can you just give us more broadly? I mean, you know what it's like. It does require hours and hours and hours to fine tune. You start with potentially a state, then you're looking at sort of a city inside that state or a region, and then you're starting to filter down in terms of that localization. What were some of the sort of broader metrics or variables that informed you that you were confident that your selection of area was going to be sufficient? You never know that it's going to be the best area, but sufficient enough, and then the type of property that you were looking for inside that area that gave you the comfort to execute on your own.
Yeah, so there, as you would know, if you wanted to find data, there's a million different things you could look at, and it's almost like analysis paralysis. There's too much data. All of a sudden, that good investment doesn't look great because you found another data point that says otherwise. And at the end of the day, you're not going to get a perfect investment. There's always going to be little kind of compromises you make along the way when you're trying to purchase a property or find a location or suburb to purchase in. More generally, all the data points I kind of look at are all basically supply and demand. I was looking at areas that lacked the supply, there was plenty of demand, and ultimately that's what causes capital growth, rental growth, and they're the areas you want to buy in. That's why obviously Perth and Adelaide, Brisbane, these kind of markets, they're very undersupplied. I think Perth's 30% down year on year for stock into a market that was already low as it was. So it's just crazy. That's why it's kind of seen that growth. So yeah, there's different things you can look at, the vacancy rates, stock on market. They're kind of just a couple of the many points I look at to find the suburb. And then you've got to actually look at the property too. So all three of my properties actually are all high yielding, like 6.5% plus. all of them have enough land and the right zoning with site access that if I want to put a granny flat or subdivide or just give me kind of an option down the line for a cash flow play, they've also got that. So they're just kind of little things I had learnt away that I wanted to prioritize. But like I said, it's not going to be a perfect investment. You've just got to back the research you've put in and back yourself, I guess.
Nice one.
So tell us, two in the portfolio. What's going on from here?
So speaking to the broker, soon realizing that it's really starting to dry up. You can't just keep borrowing forever. I thought the banks would just keep giving me money. It was great, but I soon realized that wasn't the case. This is kind of where I started to get more serious. I knew I wanted to continue buying. So I formed what I like to call the A team. So obviously the two main people is a investment savvy broker. You guys preach this, and I knew that early on that I needed not just a broker that helps the mum and dads and the first home buyers, someone that knows how to build a portfolio, knows the little things that you can do to get into that next property, and also a property savvy accountant. Same thing, an accountant that deals with property investors. So my accountant, he's late 30s. I think he's got like 25 million of property, so makes me look like a little grain of sand compared to him, but he's great. So I've surrounded myself with two great individuals, formed that team around me, and started looking at the next one. And I knew if I purchased this third property in my personal name, less my income increased, something happened with the rates, which we never know which way they're going at the moment. I don't think the RBA does either, unless I couldn't reduce my expenses anymore because I was absolutely bare minimum at the time. So it was basically I had to pay off debt or increase my income to get into that next one. So this is where I lent on the advice of an accountant to look at different avenues that I'll be able to purchase. So this third property I purchased in a trust and company structure to hopefully be able to preserve my borrowing power.
So talk us through some of the mechanics of why he said that to you and how that enabled you to actually overcome some of those glass ceilings that you're experiencing with the lending.
Yeah, so again, an accountant's going to explain this a lot better than me. This isn't financial advice. Obviously, if you're looking at this kind of structure, speak to the professionals. Find a property savvy broker who's done it himself, done it thousands of times for other clients. Essentially, this structure I was going down, the company and trust structure, if I bought within this kind of entity and I could make the property positive over the next year, whether I do a small reno or I increase rent or could pay down some debt, all the different ways you could potentially make this property positively geared. Some lenders will be able to disregard that debt and allow you to purchase again with an accountant's letter, like claiming that it's washing its face essentially. There are obviously pros and cons of this. It's more expensive up front, ongoing costs are more, there's land tax implication. There's a lot of different things you need to consider, but that's why you need to speak to the professionals. I'm not a professional. Speak to your accountant. They'll be able to summarize a lot better than I can.
But it's a really good point for obviously those people in our community, right? Because we haven't spoken a lot about, going more aggressively into different types of structures. So what we're talking about there is, buying through a corporate trustee through basically a discretionary trust model. And then obviously the other option there is self-managed super funds is also another vehicle in which you would consider, looking at buying property. And the reason for that, and to put a context around Harley's position for our community, Harley wants to go hard. He wants to get a significant sort of portfolio as quickly as he possibly can. What we sort of more broadly teach to our community is this idea that 2 or 3 properties supplemented with your super will give you a very comfortable $2,000, even a $2,500 a week passive lifestyle. So if you want to do this passively, but making sure that your money's working harder for you, i.e. to get that cash on cash return and use that leverage to control a bigger asset, that's a very simple and easy way to do it. It's not very heavy on the cognitive load, and you're able to do that usually in your personal names. But Harley's serious about this. In effect, you could argue that he's going to turn his small rental accommodation business into a larger rental accommodation business over time and build that out significantly. So when you're doing that and you're sort of sitting back and you're saying, well, I can't necessarily do it in my own personal name, I then can potentially sit down and talk are more sophisticated. And you've also got to remember that he's probably done his 10,000 hours of research in this area. And so now through that, he's got greater knowledge to be able to make more informed decisions. So as you said, that's not advice for everyone else to follow. It's just basically giving context around his journey and his story to be able to be 24 and have 3 properties locked into the portfolio, with obviously a lot more to come based on that story.
Harley, there's about 26 million people in this country, and a very small percentage of those buy an investment property, right? 2.3, say. Of that 2.3, only 9% go above 2. So you're in this very, very small group of people who've actually got 3 or more properties. So my question to you is, where does the family home come into your thinking? And where is the North Star on what you're thinking in terms of what the portfolio size could be? Because as Ben said, we spend a lot of time on this podcast trying to encourage people to get 2 investment properties and combine it with their super and pay off their home. But clearly at 24 and you've got a big vision. So what does that look like? What sort of thought have you put into your North Star?
Yeah, so starting with the owner-occupied property, would love to have your own place. Everyone would, somewhere to call home and do up yourself. It's not on the cards for me for at least the next decade. I know that for me to be able to build this portfolio, unfortunately, owner-occupied debt on my income would essentially kill my borrowing. You don't have the rental income coming in. You don't get the tax deductibility, all those kind of things that can help you progress your portfolio. So until I establish my portfolio and reach my passive income goal, it's not a priority for me. So I live with the parents at the moment, as I said earlier. I do plan on moving out early next year, and I'll be going down the rent vesting path. So it's not throwing away dead money as long as you're still investing. You're not just renting and then not having any skin in the game. But that's the kind of strategy I will be going forward. My North Star, I have very kind of clear goals in terms of passive income. It sounds very ambitious and out of the question to a lot of people, but I want to have a passive income of 200,000 in my 30s. So I'm 24 now. This gives me 15 years and however many days to achieve this. And I know it's ambitious, but Dad always used to say, you shoot for the moon, and if you miss, you end up upon the stars. So I love pushing myself and seeing what's possible. So that's the goal. And ultimately, it's been a great journey because I've really found my passion. I don't know if everyone can attest to being able to find their passion. I've found my passion, and it's just helping everyday people kind of get into property. I get a bigger kick out of my mates coming to me and saying, "Oh, I've got this saved. Should I start looking for a property?" And I can give them a little bit of tips or go speak to a broker or help them get involved. And that's more rewarding for me than actually what I'm doing on my own. So eventually I get the passive income. I don't plan on being retired on a beach at 30. I'll be working till 75, 80, 90 like Ben. He'll never quit.
What does Ben look 90? Is that what you're saying?
Well,
yeah, well,
80 or 90,
but he loves what he does. What I'm saying is
live that long,
what I'm saying, Ben loves what he does. So you want to do this, you've found your passion, and mine is genuinely helping other people realize that it's not foreign. You can do it. It's going to be hard work. It's going to take some sacrifices and delayed gratification, but being able to help other people do that, that's what gets me up in the morning, gets me G'd up now talking about it.
Well, I think now is probably a time where we can put our little disclaimer in there, and we are very, very fortunate to obviously have you working in our business. So what I do love about your story is that you have been able to follow your passion. You're still on a learning journey, and I think all of us still are. I'm seeing all of the regulations coming out with tenancy reforms across it. So I'm still learning new things in terms of what can happen. So nothing will ever remain stagnant, but some of the fundamentals don't change in terms of the power of compound and being able to manage money, trap surplus, and putting it to work. But I think that, so we're obviously blessed to have you inside our organisation as you're building out our skill set, and then you're going to be able to touch and help so many others as part of that particular story. So, that we want to make sure that our community understands that Harley is part of our organisation, and that's, today that's wonderful, and we're really pleased to sort of see that happen. what are some of the things that you've observed, Harley, around, when people are coming to, what are some of those common questions you get from younger people in terms of, how do I make this happen for myself? Like, you've done it, but how does it work for me?
Yeah, so it's almost my favorite question. I get it on social media a lot, and it'll be a 16-year-old, a 17-year-old, a 20-year-old saying, this is kind of where I'm at. I love what you've done, and it's something you've motivated me to try and do something. And it's awesome, because I go, well, if they're messaging me now at 16, 17, like, a lot of people don't start caring about their finances till their late 30s, and
Yeah.
maybe even never. So when they're like, for me, it's so rewarding seeing these messages and knowing that I can have some impact on them going to the next level and trying to get ahead. So again, going back to it, it's all self-education. So I'm the biggest preacher of it. It's free, it's cheap. You can educate yourself, and the quicker you can educate yourself, the quicker you can get involved, and the quicker you can start kind of building these things. On top of that, so the education piece, it's also there's nothing special, nothing unknown that I'm doing. It's literally hard work. It's being disciplined and following a budget, which it's not fancy stuff. If you work hard, you pick up an extra job, you work some extra shifts or whatever it is, you set up a budget and you start following it. You do that consistently, like, you will be successful from this. Add that in with the education piece, and the sky's the limit.
Like, I criticize social envy platforms a lot because of the opulence and the excess that I see out there, and people sort of getting a mixed message in their mind about what, that they're living their greatest lives, and I'm not, and so that's frustrating. But what I can say in terms of seeing content like yours, in seeing content of people who genuinely want to help others and are providing free education out there, it is incredibly empowering for those people to understand that's what it is. But again, what you're doing in terms of the full disclosure approach that you're taking, it isn't rocket science. It is hard work, and it's discipline, and it's building those habits. All the stuff Bryce and I've been talking about for a long time, but you're still going on your journey, right? And it's still, you're doing self-discovery, and then you're validating that with, as you said, you're building your A team of professional partners. And I think that's an important point. Like, even the greatest players in the world, Bryce and I always say, have coaches, and they still have mentors and people who they validate those ideas against. But you want the people that you're taking that advice from to have potentially walked a mile or seen a mile in their shoes, to be able to sort of give some gravity to the explanation of why they're saying, yes, that's true, that could happen, and that could happen, and so forth. Because otherwise, when you do taste a lot of success early, and you've picked obviously one of the hottest markets in the country in WA, you've got some great success there. There will be some lean times, and the cycle will show itself up at some time. That's part of the economic cycle. So I do want to compliment you on that, and I do want to say to all of those younger people who are out there listening to this sort of stuff is, yes, the education information is out there on these platforms. Don't listen to the noise of people living their best lives and doing their Insta rolls. Do follow the people who are in the grind, who are doing the hard yards, who are showing you a pathway forward, and connect with them and get behind them, which sounds like exactly what they're doing with you, Harley. And so good luck to those people. And interestingly enough, they're probably the people listening to this. All of those people that I talk about with social envy, they're not even listening. So I know we're talking to our community who are dedicated to this sort of work, and who are accessing platforms like Moorr, and who are doing the research work that you're doing, and ultimately are starting to build up that momentum in their wealth creation journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that, you touched on it. That's really why I started posting my stuff in the first place. A lot of my mates, up until I started posting, I only started in January this year. I think two of my mates actually knew I even had a portfolio. It's not something that I ever really wanted to advertise or not that it was showboating, but I just never wanted them to kind of think that I've got this ego.
Judge you. Yeah.
Go up.
Yeah.
Which I've never wanted to do that. And the only reason I kind of started posting was I thought, I'm like, if I'm doing this and I could show people my grind, like my Wednesdays, I work 15 hours every Wednesday. That's not glamorous. That's not fun. No one wants to be doing that. But I'll show you, this is how I've kind of built it. I work every single day. I will work every single day going forward. So being transparent and kind of showing people that every day just showing them into my life that it's not all, I could be the person saying I'm 24 with 3 properties and look at me, here's me highlights on social media, stuff like that. But I feel like people are kind of, hopefully they get me more, that they see the transparency, they see me in the grind, and they want to join me.
You're authentic, mate. I mean, it comes through. You're very honest. You're very authentic. So I see that as being a real positive for you. And I also, probably the other point I wanted to make there is, back in our day when Bryce and I were growing up, money.
Well, here we go. Back in our day,
never talked about money or religion or any of that sort of stuff. Even, sort of the only thing you probably talk about was your sporting team. Now, I am noticing that that there is a little bit more dialogue being shared about people trying to, and I suspect it has got to do with trying to get into the property market, because it is a lot harder to save for a deposit. Values of properties are continuing to grow. So I think what I do like about this movement that you're involved in is that people are having more conversations about money, and they're having more conversations about budgeting. And so I'm really supportive of that movement, because, in the past, we just didn't get exposed to it as much. And so having that knowledge out there is also a really valuable asset for those people who are interested in changing their situation and taking control of their own destiny, rather than allowing others or playing the victim to say that, you're not allowed to, or this is not for you, it's not possible for you as well.
Hey, Harley, you've actually built a following on social media over 50,000 in a very short period of time. So I think that kind of gives everyone who's listening to this an understanding of the authentic nature from which I think people are really hungry. To Ben's point before, hungry to see, right? But we'll put the details in so people can go and check out your content, and particularly for people of your generation, they should be watching it. But let's lean into the 70 hours a week, right? The unglamorous stuff, right? If you go onto your socials, you'll see that you put a phone in a microwave at BP, and you'll see that you put it on the side when you're creating a coffee and all those sorts of things. Talk to us about the two roles. And Ben sort of indicated before, we feel really it's a real joy for us that you're involved with our business, because you get to make a difference in our clients' lives, which is great. But why did you choose the broker path, and why are you still working 2 jobs?
Yeah, so obviously got the 2 jobs, as Ben said. I'm at Empower Wealth as an associate broker now. It's the reason I actually even came to Empower Wealth in the first place was, obviously I do align, I think, really well with what your guys' message. I'm the biggest preacher of your podcast and what you guys provide. So I knew that if there's a role kind of in that business, I feel like we align. You care about the fundamentals, the doing the things right, the work hard, your budget, you invest, and then over the long term, the decades game that is property, you will do well. So I knew I wanted to align myself with an organization like that. Why I chose mortgage broking, it's kind of a 2-pronged aspect. One, I love seeing what everyone's doing each day. I love seeing what properties they're buying. We have some people that come through that have amazing portfolios, and it really almost humbles me and gives me some more motivation to go, oh, this guy is killing it, and I'm thinking I'm doing okay. But I love that side of it. And I also, there's obviously, you can make a good wage with mortgage broking and help a lot of people. So it kind of was a good way, my numbers side of my brain and making money, and also genuinely interested in property and helping people build these portfolios. So that's where I kind of ended up in the broking niche. As I said, I'm still at BP, so I'm there 20, 25 hours a week. It's a cruisy job, and I must say to people, if it was a second job where I needed a lot of brain power or it was really laborious, I probably wouldn't be able to do it. The key for this job is I can go there, I talk to customers, I make a couple of coffees. It's a very relaxing job. I can switch my brain off. That my brain's like a beehive. It's always going. So it's almost like a little happy place. It's not that happy working there, but I mean, it's a place I can go, turn off, and know that I'm collecting my wage each week. And if I didn't still have that job, I'd be lucky to I'd probably be in one property. The next 2 wouldn't have been an option on my income.
So what's interesting too is in a couple of years, you've turned your $100,000 into, and you've publicly disclosed this, so I'm not talking out of school, but to over $450,000 in equity in a couple of years, which is incredible for a couple of things. One, starting, 2, taking action, but 3, the lens of being a borderless investor has actually served you. You live in regional Victoria. You wouldn't have achieved the same outcome if you had to put your money in those markets. So it kind of gives you that opportunity to play around the grounds, which is something that we've been talking about for a long time on this podcast. But if we go to your social media following, one of the things I found interesting is you go out there and you say Q&A Sundays, and you ask people to give you and there's a bunch of questions that pop up, which is not too dissimilar to what we've been talking. What's your tips? How would you do it? Tell us about the trust rate, all that sort of stuff. But what I found really interesting, and I think it's the reason I want to raise it is because I think it's really symptomatic of your generation. I'm making a big assumption here, but someone, in my judgment, in your generation has said, "When are you buying a Lambo?" You remember that one?
Yeah, I do.
And then your response was the vintage Porsche 911 will be coming, but here's the important part. Once the portfolio is built, and then you put, I'm not a car guy, but these are hot, right? So I, I think in one image that and we'll see if we can put it up for the for our YouTube watchers, but that image I think really kind of defines you. You've got your priorities so right, and for people in your generation, they're going, well, when you're buying the Lambo, no, that's not what it's about. You've chosen like when's that Porsche? Is that a 90s Porsche that you've chosen?
Yeah. I'm not great with cars, as I said, but yeah, it's a beautiful car, vintage. So yeah, it's old, but yeah, vintage 911s to go.
Yeah, nice. Well, I hope that people can let that message land, because it's all about once the portfolio is built. To Ben's point, you're choosing hard now, so you got easy later, and you're also choosing to display that your life is not full of bling. That'll actually come later. So, hey, on your social media, you said that 3 books have changed your life. One's Atomic Habits, 2 is The Defining Decade, and 3 is The Alchemist. Atomic Habits, that makes sense. Why The Defining Decade and why The Alchemist?
Yeah, so The Defining Decade by Meg Jay was a great book. I guess it's obviously related to people in their 20s, which I am, and a lot of my audience is. It's kind of, you hear it a lot that it's like, you can either get ahead financially, or you live your 20s and you go find yourself, you travel, you have a lot of fun, that's what your 20s are for. And I get that. But my point was, and which is the same stance that Meg Jay has, was you can do both. Like you can still have this fun, smell the roses along the way, but also just not neglect your financial future and play catch up in your 30s. So for me, like, I've been to 9 countries in the last 3 years. So I haven't sacrificed these overseas trips. I just fit them into the budget, and also the very budget friendly trips. So I've just been to China for 10 days for $1,000, return international flights, 10 nights accommodation, saw the Great Wall, did all that good stuff. It cost me like $1,500 to $2,000 to go on that trip. And now I've ticked China off. But if I wanted to be that influencer and I'm going to China and I'm staying in beautiful 5-star resorts, like, you could do that, but it just doesn't fit my budget and my financial goals. So my thing, which is why I really relate with that book, is you can definitely do both. Spend that time in your 20s chasing passions and all that, but don't neglect your financial future as well.
Harley, so we need to lean in on that. Like 9 countries in 3 years, and you're on a very specific budget. Like, let's speak to the people who want to know how. You clearly apply as much research to budget holidays as you do to your investment properties.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the first trips was Europe. So it wasn't the glamorous 40,000 trip. You're staying in the beautiful places like I saw you staying, Bryce. I definitely wasn't staying in those. But me and my mate went to Europe. So there we go. You're half the cost of accommodation right there. Pick a buddy to go with. That's the first start. We flew with Scoot, which is the most budget airline I think I've ever been on. We didn't actually even get a window. So that was great. And on that trip, I think we got return flights for like $1,000. I had friends who live in Barcelona, so we had a lot of free accommodation over in Spain and things like that. So we just prioritized, me and my mate, that we wanted to focus our money on the memories, the having fun, the seeing the sports games, rather than the flight we sit on and the bed we lay in, because we couldn't really care less where we put our head at night. So we did all that trip on somewhat of a budget, and it was just something that I put in my budget. So I didn't feel the guilt of living my life and having fun over in Europe like everyone does. But I was doing it on the budget because I wasn't going to sacrifice what the financial goals were that I'm chasing. So yeah, that's just how I like to travel.
And there's a wonderful message there for people to really take heed of too. And just so that we keep it humble too, Harley, I was in Airbnbs as well. I was with some of my best mates, and we combined costs for accommodation. So, but what I did tell my kids, Harley, and you'll probably really appreciate this, is we were sitting at a restaurant in Santorini with the most spectacular view. Right, I think you might have what you saw on the socials. And I leaned over to both of them. I said, the reason that we're here today, crew, is because of decisions that you and that me and your mother made many years ago that allows us to be in this position now. So,
that gives me goosebumps, mate. That's what it's all about, isn't
well,
it?
Mate, I'm 49
no
going to
judgment.
Santorini for the first time, and they are 11 and 13. So I had to make sure that they realised that that was the case. But all right. Well, as we turn for home, my last one for you is before we throw to Ben is The Alchemist. I read that book at the beginning of this year for the first time as a 49-year-old, mate. But you're reading it as 24. Why did that one have such an impact on your life?
So one, I read the book because I just had so many recommendations. I always look for recommendations, and I'm the first one to buy a book. I really aligned with it, where trying to find your purpose, and it was kind of at the time where I was really discovering property and my want to build a portfolio, and it was almost like a catalyst for why I actually even started posting my story. Was a couple of my mates would come to me with some advice on what they should do. I've always been the money man in our friendship group, and I'd help them set up a budget. Same with my sister. And I've always that's just how, it's almost like a love language. That's how I like to help people and show that I care, is set them up financially. So yeah, this book's all about kind of finding your North Star, and I've got a very kind of clear picture of where I want to be. And like you mentioned with your Greece trip, Bryce, at the end of the day, I'm not in property to own property, or even the money point. The point for me is that it gives you time back with the family, time back with my future family. I hope they're in the position where they thank Dad for all the hard work that he did back in his day. But yeah, it's the time aspect, time back with family, the financial freedom, and I really align with that. So the book, Finding Your North Star, that's my North Star.
Mate, it talks about finding your personal legend, and I think you are well and truly finding your personal legend. But Ben, as we head for home, your final question?
Yeah, well, more of a final observation. I think it's really important, as going back to the Lambo and the Porsche 911, and what Bryce was just sort of talking about in terms of trying to, Santorini or whatever, beautiful views. There is absolutely no judgment or problem with having those unbelievable experiences. And if some of those experiences, like if you want to go to space when you're 60 and it costs you $10,000 to go to space, I mean, all good to you, because effectively what Bryce was saying before about you planted a seed, it grew a massive tree. And ultimately, when you look at your wealth speed and your wealth clock, you can then work out that, if you built that sort of level of wealth, that trip to space for $100,000 or whatever might only be 6 months of your wealth, in terms of, so that's okay, and give yourself permission to do that. But the point I'm making is, the 0.0000001% of people who are making it through social envy platforms who are doing that, everyone then thinks I can go off and do that. No, that's, it's so remote chance of doing it. You've got more chance of winning the lotto in Australia than you have of making it successful in that particular space. So don't waste your time. Waste your time on building asset bases. Waste your time on building out that nest egg that in 20 or 30 years' time is going to give you the opportunity to have those amazing experiences with your family, to get back your time for doing what you want. And yeah, to Harley's point, being able to cultivate that and do that for others is highly rewarding. We mentioned, the great message that we got last week, and, the dark chocolates and almonds, as part of, like, when we're helping others, it's beautifully rewarding for you. And I think, Harley, you're on that journey as well. And so really that's more of a congratulations for the journey so far. But I just see the sky's the limit for you. And I'm really, excited about, what's going to be coming in the next couple of years, and then ultimately off the back of that, in terms of the momentum that you're building here. It's great to watch, and you're doing a social good in terms of helping others and teaching others basically what needs to be done, which is, what Bryce and I have been trying to do for a long time.
Thanks, Ben. That's very kind. Gonna make me choke up.
Well, Harley, I think you should take a bow, mate. One of the reasons I wanted you to come on to the podcast is because I actually wanted someone for my kids to watch. They're not going to listen to me, right? But I wanted someone for my kids to watch. And what is so incredibly rewarding about the conversation is the humility that you've brought to this conversation and your portfolio build and the social media following that you're creating. I want my kids to see role models like that. So I guess I would love for anyone who's listening to this, who's got kids anywhere from whatever age you want to expose them to, but just this is a really safe message for you to let your kids watch, because there was nothing dangerous in anything that Harley said. He basically said, work hard, have a very clear view of what you want to do. And here's the big one: take action. Take action. So the floor is yours, Harley. What's your final thing that you'd like to say? Talk to your generation of folks to say who might have been inspired by your story. What's the parting message that you think they need to hear?
Yeah, it's almost going back to the first question, and it's just get rid of the victim mindset, the loser's mentality, block out the noise that you'll never be able to get into the market. Because if you have that mindset, fair chance is you probably never will. If you've got that mentality from the start, you may never get into it. So again, not to sound like a broken record, Bryce, but I am all about doing the small things well, and there's no magic here. It's just doing these things. It's working hard. It's educating yourself, taking action. And if you do that consistently, like, it's Bob's your uncle, you're gonna do well. It's not that
happens.
Not that hard. So for the people listening at home, I just urge you to take action. Whether it's reading a book, go buy a book, go listen to the first 20 episodes of this podcast that I recommend to a lot of people when you're trying to get that base level of understanding. Whether it's follow me on Instagram. I'll give myself a little plug. But it's just doing something. So don't listen to this podcast. It's great you're listening to it in the first place, but start taking action. Get that budget sorted. Maybe speak to that mortgage broker to see what's possible and start working a point for you to start targeting, and really just get clear on what you want to do. If you want to buy a property and get into the market, start giving yourself some timelines and things you want to achieve it by. But the ultimate message is just educate yourself and take action.
I love it, mate. Thank you very much for that. That's awesome message. And if I can give a plug for us, if you're going to start a budget, do it on the Moorr platform, because it's really easy and there's money smarts built into it as well. And just before we go to your life hack, I just wanted to I made a note here earlier for one tip for the mum and dads who might be considering helping, someone get into the market, one of their kids get into the market. Before you agree to doing that, if your child is a spender and they haven't been able to control their money, try and set an initial goal for them to prove to you that they can save $5,000 or 10 grand. Because what you don't want to have to do is, if your child doesn't, fulfill their end of the bargain, and you're left to then sort of carry the load, no one wins in that sort of situation. So my tip to them is just, if your child's doing all of the great things of setting up a budget, trapping that surplus, demonstrating the habits and behaviours, then it's a no-brainer. Get amongst it and help them out as much as you can. But obviously for those children who haven't been able to do that and they have instant gratification and they can't manage their money, teach them how to manage their money first, set a goal for them in the next 6 months, and then after that, start to get serious about how you might do a joint venture together or something along those lines as well. Because there are definitely kids that are going to come to their parents and say, I've just listened to this great pod and, Harley's doing this amazing thing and I want to do it. And it's like, that's great and I want to support you, but let's just do the basics first. Let's build some habits and behaviors, and then we'll leapfrog off and leverage off the back of that.
Well said, Ben, and well done to you, Harley. You got Bob's your uncle. Haven't had that on the podcast in 500 years. That was a sneak, and you got your social media plug in. But we're going to put the links to your profiles anyway. But mate, well done. I'm looking forward to having a conversation with your parents. They must be absolutely chuffed and really proud of you, mate. So you're doing your family proud, and well done to you. And thanks for coming and sharing your story on the Property Couch.
Absolutely, boys. Thanks for having me. Been a pleasure. Hopefully do it again one day.
Yeah, mate. Thanks for coming on and sharing your message to the world. It's a brilliant message.
There you go, Ben. What a impressive young man Harley is.
Yeah, super impressive, mate. Obviously, we were able to give him a compliment for the actual hard yards he's already done. But simple story, right? Hard work, building habits and behaviours, delayed gratification. I mean, who would have thought? Who would have thought that that's what's required to actually have financial success? So, all credit to Harley. He really is representing his next generation really, really strongly. And so, if you're not following him, I would recommend you get on board and follow his story because it's very transparent and very authentic in terms of the way in which he delivers his message.
Ben, what a joy it is for a couple of old timers like us, because as
Yes.
we've done the hard yards of doing what we're doing, and then it can be a little frustrating when you see the younger generation just wanting it without having to actually put in the hard yards. So it's just so rewarding to speak to someone who's just like, no victim here. I'm actually going to roll my sleeves up and I'm going to do what it takes to fulfill my journey. And the bit where you and I always talk about choose your hard now, easy later, easy now, hard later. He's well and truly gone hard now, and not only easy later, but that easy is going to come a whole lot earlier. And instead of 2,000 a week, Benny's going for 4,000 a week. So
it's going to come in spades. It's going to come in spades, and it's going to keep multiplying as he gets older and older. So it's a great story.
Yeah, it's a really great story. Hey Ben, life hack today for me. I have to apologise. I don't have one prepared today, right? So
what have you been doing? You've been working hard.
So, well, arguably, so I've got a little special guest today who might be able to help me with the life hack. So here we go. Let's have a little listen to see who I've got to help me today. Hey Harley, before you go, I just want to get a little bit from you about a round of life hack. I've really enjoyed the conversation that we've had today, but I sent it out to you before you came on and said, hey, listen, is there any life hack you live by? And you said, yeah, I want to share one. So what is it?
Yeah, so life hack for me is just looking at life at 6 months at a time. So a lot of people listen to the audio, they listen to the podcast and they do nothing. They listen to the next podcast and maybe they don't take action. So my thing is so much can change in 6 months. So why don't you just put your head down, bum up and work harder for the next 6 months? So whether that's picking up a second job, whether that's doing some more OT, depending on what industry you're in, setting up your budget and start educating yourself, start taking pride in this next 6 months, and you'll be unrecognizable in 6 months of doing these three very simple things. It's not going to be easy. It's not glamorous, as I've said all previous podcasts, but you put the hard work in, you follow discipline principles, and you take action. There's nothing that can go wrong.
Well said. Thank you, mate. And don't tell Ben I outsourced my life hack today. We'll just surprise him, all right?
No, between us, mate.
There you go, Ben. Didn't give you a heads up, but just thought I'd outsource it today. Just you've done it in the past. I thought if it's good enough for Ben, it's good enough for me.
Oh, I love the idea, and I like the breaking it down. Big goals get broken down into small goals. 6 month focus. Try your hardest in that 6 months. Transform yourself. Build some momentum. Get some gratification in the fact that you've actually achieved something, and build on it. So it's a great little life hack from Harley.
Thank you, Harley, for helping me out there. Of course, we're mucking around, Ben. I said, what do you got, Harley? Surely you've got a life hack. And he said, I've got plenty. So he came well and truly prepared for that. What's making property news, mate?
Mate, I wanted to talk about some data that's sort of come out of Melbourne and the oversupply. Now, who would have thought we've got a housing crisis and it's a supply issue, but not so much in the supply of new vacant land that we have in Melbourne. So we're back in what we call rebate country, Bryce. Now, I've been doing this for about 30 years now. And so there's I reckon this is the third time in Melbourne's journey that I've heard through the grapevine and through obviously the research that I do that we're starting to see rebates. Now, what's a rebate? A rebate is when the developer has excess land and they're trying to incentivize people to actually buy that land. And so what they do is they say, if you sign a contract and you execute on that contract, we are going to give you a rebate of X number. And at this stage, there's rebates around the Melbourne metropolitan market of around $35,000. Now, a trick for new players, or a sort of a be careful of new players here. Just remember, as you submit that contract to the bank, the value, if they see that rebate, they will also reduce the value of that land by the equivalent rebate that's in play. So that's something to look at. The other thing they're also doing to incentivize sales is to look at very, very low deposits. So you can potentially look around the market for deposits of around $10,000 to secure a block of land. So that's pretty interesting. Now, there was some data inside the article in the Fin Review, and that we'll put a link in the show notes to. But usually, they're arguing that the reason for this oversupply currently in vacant land had a lot to do with the home builder incentive that we saw in 2021 and 22, where the government so that forward booked all that demand, and so we've got a lag of demand coming into that area. But normally we would see sales in the Greater Melbourne area of around 34,000 lots of land, and that's what we got to in 2021. But that is crashed to about 600 sales a month, or just over 7,000 annualized. So and the other critical point here, right, is everyone thinks, well, does that mean that land values are going to go down further? Well, this is the supply-demand story, and if you think about the human behaviour that's going on here. So really what's going to happen here is if land values get too high, but you're seeing flat existing property sales, which is what we're seeing in Melbourne, a lot of people are choosing to buy existing because it's good value. Now, as that existing stock eventually starts to grow in value again, that will push those land values higher. But when you don't see a differential between the new vacant land versus the existing, some people will go into existing. Now, of course, there's also the backlog and getting access to builders and builders going broke. So there's a whole big sentiment issue that's playing on there. And I think if you also overlay that with the other story around investor sentiment, there was a lot of people who would buy house and land packages for investment purposes. Obviously, with all the tenancy reforms, the increase in land tax, there's a lot of investors who have also been pulled out of the market. So what am I saying here? Well, if you are sensible, you might say to yourself, if you're looking to, go out into a new location and build your own home as a lifestyle decision, well, it's not a bad time to start doing your research and start doing your negotiations, because it's unlikely that it's going to get much more cheaper than this. But I would say negotiate super hard. All right, this is the time when others are fearful. It's time to be greedy. So if you are thinking about a lifestyle choice, not an investment choice, what we believe in terms of vacant land in these new estates, there is always that risk of oversupply, which means lower capital growth in the short term. But if this is about you beginning a family and starting a family in Melbourne, it's not a bad time to start doing your research. Check out this article. Again, link in the show notes, and you'll learn a little bit more about where the median price is sitting at and where you can potentially negotiate hard in some of those developer estates.
Yeah, well said. So take note, Victorian governments. We need some incentives to bring people back, and this is a little canary in the coal mine to sort of help with.
Do you know that they were having a special committee, like the government announced a big sort of property housing focus about how to solve the problem?
Did you get an invite?
Of course not. And do you reckon they know the answer? Like, just don't do what you just did.
Yeah.
Drop the land tax that you just
drop
the land tax and reduce the minimum standards, and you'll start to see investors coming back into the market. Or, because obviously there's a sentiment shift going on there too. There's other people who are like, oh, am I going to get in if the values are going to keep falling they are at the moment? So, I mean, it's not rocket science, but they don't want to hear that. They don't want that, because, I mean,
they want someone to explain why the stamp duty revenues dropped, Ben.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, it's just
very good.
They're
today, mate.
a joke.
Thank you for your efforts as always, and thanks again to Harley for joining us on the show, which I think is a ripper. And just a shout out to all the parents. Feel free to share it with your friends, your colleagues, anyone who you think has a young one who really might benefit from hearing that story. Because it is inspiring, and it just goes to show that with the right moves, property isn't out of reach for everyone, mate. Until next week.
Knowledge is empowering, Bryce, but only if you do what Harley did and act on it.
Ooh, like what you did there. See you next week, folks.